Okay, welcome everybody to the next episode of the Porn to Purpose podcast. Today we have a special guest who I'm very excited and honored to have here with us, Larry Hagner of the Dad Edge. Larry, it's so great to have you here with us today, brother. Thank you for joining.
Oh man, it's awesome to be here. What a good topic to talk about amongst men.
Yes, sir. Really looking forward to digging on this with you. If it's okay, Larry, I'm just going to go ahead and read your bio, and then we'll go ahead and begin the conversation here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Excellent. So, Larry Hagner is the creator of the Dad Edge podcast. Featured as one of the top dad podcasts on iTunes, the show has received over 5 million downloads. Larry is the author of two best-selling books. He has featured some of the most elite humans on the planet. He lives in St. Louis with his wife Jessica and their four boys. Welcome, Larry Hagner.
Oh man, good to be here, my man.
It's an honor, brother. We've been working on putting this together for a little while now.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. Good, brother. Well, I'd love to just go ahead and begin. I know there are some of your community members here inside of our community. We are streaming live here today inside of the Porn to Purpose community. But for those of you who do not maybe know of you yet, I would love just to give you an opportunity just to make an introduction, share a little bit about yourself and whatever you think is relevant regarding your story, brother.
Sure. You know, I've been doing the Dad Edge. I obviously the founder and of that particular platform. It didn't start pretty, if I'm just being really honest, right? I've told this story a lot. It started out in a really dark place. Started out of struggle. Started out of not knowing what I was doing. Started with actually spanking my 4-year-old and regretting every minute of that. Spanking him one time and spanking him so hard that he actually hit the ground. That was 10 years ago. And I was raised, and I'm happy to go into my childhood if you want, in a very chaotic environment where that was the norm. And I swore to myself that when I became a father, that I would not do that. And unfortunately, I did. And not only did I do that, but I knew all these things because of my childhood of all these things of what not to do. And what I found out very, very quickly, I didn't know what I'm about to say at the time, but I know it very clearly now. And that is, if you know what not to do, clearly that's not nearly enough. So if I tell you, like, it's like literally, you buy your new barbecue pit at or grill at Lowe's, and you open up the instructions, and it's like, okay, here's the top 100 things not to do when putting this thing together. You'd still be completely and totally lost. And that's literally how I felt as a father. I'm like, okay, I know I'm not going to beat my kids. I know I'm not going to throw beer bottles at them. I'm not going to scream profanities and call them names, right? And do all these things that were done to me. And I wasn't doing those things. But what I could tell you is that I kind of had my toe in the water as it pertains to being a father. I just sort of kind of managed it from out here. I wasn't really close as I wanted to with my kids. I didn't know how. My marriage, was mediocre at best, right? I wasn't getting the intimacy that I had back then. I'll be very, very honest and upfront. Porn was a go-to back then, right? I didn't realize how destructive it was back then. It was kind of, I never really got into. I'm not a big drinker. I don't do drugs. That's not my thing. My vice was that. It's like when I wasn't getting my needs met, I'd go to that. I've learned better since then. But my marriage wasn't on the rocks, but it wasn't great at all. It was just sort of in limbo. And I had that dark moment with my son. And it was from that moment that I was like, I've got to do something different. I've got to do something different. I don't know what I'm doing. And what I can tell you is at the time, I got my validation in my life from two areas. One was my job. I was in medical device sales at the time, and I was really good at it. Made my quota every year. I won awards. I did very, very well. At the time, I was doing martial arts. I was really into that. And I started really thinking about, like, what are those areas in my life why am I good at those things? Well, I'm good at those things because I went through training. I'm constantly learning on my job. I'm constantly learning new ways to interact with people. I'm constantly, honing that craft of communication and sales and leadership and problem solving and all these things. Martial arts, no different. I'd go to class 2 to 3 times a week. I'm always learning. I'm always perfecting. I'm always practicing, right? And learning the skills it takes to do all these different things in martial arts. Well, when I really start to reflect upon, like, well, what do I do about marriage? What do I do with parenting? I'm winging it just like everybody else, but aren't you supposed to do that? And what I realized very, very quickly was that society and just the way the world works, it really sets us up for absolute disaster in those areas, because we expect ourselves to just know how to do it, just to know how to do it naturally, right? And that's really unfortunate, because there are so many things within parenting, right? Raising young men, raising young women, being married to the woman that you're married to. There are so many skills that we have to learn in order to navigate those relationships, those waters, to elevate the relationship, the connection, the intimacy with our wives, all these things that are so important. And unfortunately, we also have the perception on top of that, that we already know, we should know what to do already. But when trouble hits, we have the perception of like, well, we're broken or we're weak. If I need help from a counselor, I'm weak. If I have to go to couples therapy with my wife, we're broken. If I have to hire a coach or a mentor, something's wrong with me. There's nothing crazier if you really, really think about it. And think about it like this. I mentioned martial arts. I had Frankie Edgar, who's a UFC legend, on the podcast. And I actually went up to New Jersey and I was at his house and I was on his podcast, and he and I were joking about this. And I used the same analogy, and I looked at him and I said, Frankie, I was like, imagine it this way. I was like, what if you were about ready to enter the octagon and you never had been in a fight in your entire life? You never wrestled, but you watched it a lot. You watched MMA on TV, and, and your coach was like, hey, you don't need to train. You'll figure it out. Don't worry. Once you get in the cage, you'll be good. You've seen it on TV. You got this, man. Don't worry about it. Like, what would happen? And he just started laughing. He's like, I'd get pummeled. I was like, yeah, well, we get pummeled in our marriages. We get pummeled in parenting. And it's because we don't have that coach or that mentor who's training us. Right. And we don't, and certainly it's like a lot of us like, hey man, I don't want to read a book on this stuff. It's kind of embarrassing. Right. But men are actually really good at listening to content. Now we've got podcasts now. When I was going through my struggle, podcasting was just getting started. And now we've got a plethora of resources, which is good. So yeah, I'd like to say that my journey started off amazing, but it did not.
Beautiful, brother. Thanks so much for that share. It gives me some real scope into your journey. And I see so many men inside of our community share a similar story. My question, Larry, is so I hear that you were called to this personal, maybe spiritual development work, and kind of going to work on the areas and maybe some of the areas in your life where you experience these deficiencies and lack of knowledge or skill set or understanding. What actually called you then into leadership of other men? Is that a call you had always experienced in your life, or is that something that you just kind of woke up with one day?
That's a great question. Here's the funny thing. I never really I never really viewed myself as a leader, right? In this, like for me, especially when I first started the podcast back in 2015, I really looked at it as this is a learning opportunity, right? I didn't even start podcasting for a following or anything like that. That wasn't it still isn't the main focus of like the podcast and the mission. The main focus of the podcast and the mission is to learn as much as we can, to learn these strategies from these experts, right? To have a front row seat to some of the most amazing education experiences that we could possibly imagine, right? And to be able to take those learnings and then to implement them into our lives. So my view of it in the beginning, like when I first started podcasting, is kind of funny. Like I was like, man, if I'm going to get on this microphone, I better know exactly, I have to know everything about fatherhood. And what I found out really, really quickly is that's actually a disservice to the audience and to the mission, to be honest. Like, what if I actually viewed myself as the first student in line who's curious and who's asking the questions and who's learning right along with the community? And once I embraced that, that in and of itself became clear that this is an element of leadership, because leaders do learn, right? Like we have 700 guys in Dad Edge Alliance, right, in our mastermind. And I will always raise my hand and tell you, I don't have all the answers. I don't. I've learned a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two, farmers insurance. But so I know a lot more skills and a lot more things. I'm way more advanced than I used to be. But every day being a father and a husband is still new, right? I'm still faced with challenges, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure about that one, right? So, but the real power in I think in education, as far as like experiential education, is in community and what we call crowdsourced wisdom. Crowdsourced wisdom. Matt, listen, I I don't know all the skills, to eradicate porn out of a man's life. I'm not an expert in that, but you know a lot, right? So this is where the power of tribe and the power of community really comes in, because if one of my guys is really struggling with porn, right, struggling with that vice, we've got guys in our community. I know I'm like, hey, these are the guys to go talk to. Like, they're the experts in this, right? And that's the power, that if each man takes a skill set, right, something that we master, something that we're good at, and then we have access to that community, man, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, think about, the last thing I'll say is this. Think about this back in like when, oh gosh, what am I thinking of? Like Renaissance times, where there's knights and there's, all this stuff, right? Like maybe like William Wallace days, or like 300, right? Every man had a mastery, right? You had philosophers, right? You had the deep thinkers, right? You had blacksmith, you had warriors, you had people that were farmers for food, right? You had people that knew how to fix things, right? Every man came with a trade. You wouldn't want to ask your Praetorian warrior leader to go blacksmith a spear. That's not his forte, but he knows how to use that spear, right? So that's where, like, the power of community and tribe, we can all access these mastery skills that these men have.
Yeah, beautiful, brother. What would you say, Larry? So you've got a mastermind of 700 men, and how big is the Dad Edge, just like Facebook community presently?
So yeah, we've got 16,000
Okay.
guys in there.
What would you say are some of the common themes that you see guys showing up with? Like what would you say are some of the key aspects or qualities that are drawing guys to these sorts of communities today?
It's a great question. So I'll give you a perspective of Dad Edge Alliance, right? Because we've got fantastic research on that. We've got fantastic data on that, of what's on the mind and heart of men. Our men who join Dad Edge Alliance, they have to go through an application process, and they have to identify what area of their life has the most attention and what they really, really want, right? So we have 5 areas. We have creating an extraordinary marriage, an epic connection with your kids, optimizing physical, mental, emotional health, being a more effective leader, or mastering your finances. 8 out of 10 men have identified that creating an extraordinary marriage is the first thing on their mind and heart. Second to that is parenting. And then third is health. Fourth is leadership. And the last is finances. So the common themes that come up, right? If I look at what men are really after, if it's in their marriage, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, what they're looking for is intimacy, connection, communication. Like they're really lacking those skills, right? And it's hard for us to admit that, hey, like, I know how to communicate. Yeah, but do you know how to communicate with her? Do you know how to elevate intimacy and connection with her? Do you know how to fulfill her 3 basic needs, which are to feel seen, heard, and safe? Do you even know what your 3 basic needs are? To feel appreciated, respected, and validated? Do you know what your own love language is? Do you know what her love language is? A lot of these things we're misaligned, and things feel that we're like almost out of sorts, or almost we're off our orbit in some way, shape, or form in our marriages, but we can't really identify why. And then when I ask a man, like, hey, when it comes to communication, what is it you truly want? And I hear 2 words all the time. I want more. I want better. I'm like that. And then when I press, well, what does more look like? What will more get you? Well, I'll have more communication. Okay. If you have more of it, what are you going to do with it? And then you'll see, well, I'll be able to talk to her more. Well, how effective is it going to be? How are you going to be able to connect with her? Right. And then guys start to get it. They're like, wait a second. Yeah. So even if I had more communication, that doesn't necessarily mean better communication. And that's the second adjective I hear, better communication. I was like, well, what is better communication? I was like, well, the guys will say, well, she can tell me anything and I can tell her anything. I was like, well, that skill set is called creating an environment of psychological safety, where you don't feel judged or shamed or guilted if you bring up an idea or a vision or a question. Do you know how to create an environment of psychological safety? Most of the time, they've never even heard the term psychological safety. They're like, no, I really don't. So things like that, right? So that's marriage. When it comes to parenting, what I can tell you is men are desperately wanting to connect with their kids, right? And they want more patience with their kids. And what happens is we come down on ourselves so hardcore, because if we don't have the patience, we self-sabotage in here big time. I must be weak. I must not be a man. What's wrong with me? Why can't I have patience with my kids? Well, you know what? It's actually a skill set, Patience and emotional resilience are one and the same. They're just packaged up and bottled up just a little bit differently in how we view them. If you can teach a man how to be resilient, emotionally resilient in the face of chaos, when your kids are acting out or they lied to you or they did whatever, or they're doing something wrong, there are ways, there are skills that we can learn, that we can actually become calm and we can respond instead of having these high-level knee-jerk reactions. We lose our cool and then we go shame and guilt ourselves into an oblivion, and we self-sabotage, think we're terrible people. And then it's just this vicious cycle over and over and over again. What I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, if you teach a man a skill, and then he goes and implements those skills and he's held accountable to go implement those skills, he's going to become better at it. I use the comparison of a blacksmith, right? You put a guy, if you give him some metal and some fire, he's not going to know how to make a spear unless he's taught by the master blacksmith of how to do it. And these types of skills within your marriage, within your parenting, within your mindset and leadership, they are no different. Yet we view them as, well, I should just know how to do this automatically.
Yeah. I love that so much, man. And so these men, I would love just a little bit more context, maybe for the listeners out there who maybe are newer to this idea of personal and spiritual development, or maybe who haven't begun kind of maybe the process of investigating some of these areas of deficiency for themselves. So a man comes to you and he desires to join one of your mastermind programs, and he's identified one of these kind of key areas of the 5 that are most important to him. What does your support structure or infrastructure look like? Like how do you go to work to begin supporting men in these areas and then beginning to move forward in some of these key areas? Larry, what does that look like?
That's a great question. So obviously everyone is a little different. If I'm answering this in a 30,000 foot view, so like for instance, we have 35 mastermind call teams, virtual mastermind sessions per week, 7 days a week. We have a tactical agenda that we actually create every single month. So like for instance, in February, what we're going to be teaching the men in our mastermind are the 4 skill sets to elevate connection and communication with your wife. Each week, a man is going to learn a different skill within that realm, right? So we're going to be teaching that all through February. We've done several different tactical agendas and skill sets, like on leadership, drama-free discipline, creating more patience, learning how to clearly communicate what you need, want, desire with your wife, right? We also have themed call teams, like we have a health and fitness call team. We have a legendary marriage call team. We have a leadership call team. So we have these really niche call teams as well. So if a man wants to double down on a skill, that's what he's going to go join. The other thing we do too is we provide accountability for these guys. We actually have a role inside the alliance. Each one of these call teams is led by what we call a team captain. And then we have a second in command called the team commander. The team command, so the captain's in charge of facilitating the agenda, teaching the men everything in a group format where it's crowdsourced wisdom, and it's also experiential learning. The commander is in charge of accountability. So for instance, if we have a man that says, hey, I want to be held accountable to take my wife out on a date, the commander on the call team be like, that's great, I'm going to hold you accountable to do that, but what are you planning on doing with that time? Right? It's like, oh, I'm going to take her out to dinner. Okay, what are you going to talk about? Well, we'll probably just catch up. Be like, well, is that going to create intimacy? Because if not, we have a list of 150 generative, intimate questions, conversation starters that I'll send over to you that you have your pick from, and you can go bring that to the date. How does that sound? So we're not only holding men accountable and teaching them skills, but we're also giving them the tools and the resources where they can actually go execute these things right.
Mm-hmm. Love it, Larry. Men that are coming to your community, Larry, like what are you seeing right now? And I know we've talked about kind of these kind of 5 key areas that you focus in on, or that men have identified are most important to them. In the scope of today's world, in the context of today's world, like what are men bringing to the table most? Like what's stressing guys out right now, and what are men really dealing with, like outside of kind of maybe these key areas?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, so look at the environment we're living in right now. Yeah. There's so much uncertainty. There's so much stress. All you have to do is literally, swipe right on your phone And, you know, I see all kinds of things about January 6th, Biden and his address, and that's stressing people out. Another mandate is on the horizon. Like this, all you have to do is swipe right on these devices and your stress level will elevate, right? So there's the environment that we live in. Not to mention the fact, think about it, in the past couple of years, what we've seen is men leave the house to go to work. We're seeing in the world change. You know, men now work from home. We see a lot of men working from home. That's a whole different ballgame than how you and I grew up, right? You know, the way we grew up, our parents left the house. Now, men are dealing with, you know, if you think about it, men have two parts of their brain. Okay, we are the hunter, we are the gatherer, we are the provider. And when we are in work, we are hustling, we are hunting, we are gathering, we are providing. Like boom, like put the blinders on, I'm going to go to work, right? And when you have like little Peter coming in, he's 5 years old. Hey, daddy, hey, daddy, hey, daddy. And you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't even focus right now. Just I'll be there in a minute. Stop. Right. So we're dealing with that kind of stress because we don't know what you really need to do as a man, right? If you're out or hunting and gathering, you've got to embrace that as part of your as your masculinity. That's part of what you do. Now there's the more compassionate side of you, right? The more empathetic, the more higher emotional IQ, right? Of how you be affectionate, how you love your kid, how you come back home after the hunt, right? And there's two different ways that we operate. We're seeing a world right now where those two ways that we operate are now colliding, right? Which is elevating even stress even more. The other thing too, because of just some of the environment, the marriage divorce rate is going up. You know, not a lot of people know this. Everybody knows that the divorce rate is about 51%. We already know that. What a lot of people don't know is this. This is another thing that stresses men out because it's their marriage. Before I quote this statistic, let me share this. Show me a man who has a successful marriage, an incredible connection with his wife. I'll show you a guy who's a producer at work. You show me a man who's got his marriage on point, I'll show you a guy who's probably more patient with his kids. You show me a guy who's got his marriage on point, and I will show you a man who probably takes better care of himself emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically. Those things spill over. So back to the statistic real quick. 49% of people who stay together, they're actually divided up into three camps. This is the data we don't know, but this is proven data. It actually came from the Miracle Morning for Couples, Lance and Brandy Salazar. They really did their homework on this. 1/3 of couples who stay married, so about 33% of marriages that stay together, they can actually identify their marriage as like, hey, it's working. Like I love her, she loves, I love him, he loves me. It's working. And there's a common denominator there, and I'll get to that in a second. The second camp is like, it's all right, I guess. Kind of settling, like it's not really getting the intimacy that I want. I'm not really having the connection I want. We don't really have the conversations I want. It's kind of dry. I don't really know if it's going to work out long term. It might. I'm not really sure. And then there's the third camp. And unfortunately, this is the camp you never want to get into. And that is, we're complete strangers living underneath the same roof. I want nothing to do with you, and you don't want anything to do with me. And we're basically just waiting until these kids move out because our perception is we got to stay together for the kids, or our perception is that we can't afford to get divorced. And then we're just going to go out and do our own thing. Like we probably are doing our own thing right now. The final thing I'll say is this: the one common denominator in that group, those couples that can identify their relationship is working. And that is the growth that they do together. They know that good marriages, great marriages, do not happen by accident. And they also know it doesn't happen if we wing it. We actually have to learn skills of how to communicate. Like the wife has to be like, hey, I know your needs are to be appreciated, respected, validated. I know your love language is physical touch and words of affirmation. So I'm going to actively compliment you when I want to love you. I'm going to actively have sex with you when I want to love on you, because I know that's how you receive love. Same goes for the man, right? I might be physical touch and words of affirmation, which I am, but I also know Jessica is quality time and acts of service. So if I want to love on her while she appreciates me hugging her, kissing her, telling her how beautiful she is, it's not nearly as meaningful as what I'm doing tonight with her, which is I'm taking her out on a date so she doesn't have to be mom. And we are going to connect, and I'm going to ask her new questions. I've known her for 25 years. I already have a list of questions that I'm going to ask her tonight, to constantly pursue that woman, to constantly be curious about her, right? Because we're never going to run out of things to talk about. I don't care how long you know somebody, you're never going to run out of things to talk about. But that's what separates the relationships and marriages that do really, really well and the ones that don't, is the skills, and we grow together.
I love it, man. I'm hearing you so much, whether it be speaking to our relationships or parenting or whatever it might be. This idea of intentionality in all that we do.
Yeah, yeah, it's got to be, man. It really, really does.
We talked about, what are you seeing um, from the men out there that are coming into your community? What are the problems? What are the challenges? What are the struggles that they're bringing to the community? And we talked about the uncertainty oftentimes that we're experiencing, that all of us experience in the world today, frankly. And what we see inside of our community, Larry, is the current environment is driving men deeper into their tendencies, deeper into their addictions. If they're not conscious, if they're not intentional about what they're doing. What are you seeing as some of the impacts of maybe the stressors of the modern day man out there?
So the impact that I'm seeing is, boys are being raised by men who do not have high emotional IQ. They don't know how to create an environment of psychological safety where your kids will connect with you. They'll talk to you. They'll tell you everything, right? There's actually 3 questions on a daily basis that you can ask your kids that will instill a growth mindset in them, instill gratitude, and also instill an environment of psychological safety where they can tell you where they failed and you know how to navigate and guide them versus lecture them. So that's one, right? A lot of us don't know that skill set. I'm happy to share that if you want. The other thing too is that you mentioned vices, right? I can't remember what the statistics are, but I'm sure you probably know. I believe when COVID hit, like what was it, X videos and Pornhub, like the traffic has gone through the roof, right? And I want you to ask me anything you want to about porn, because I know that that's part of the reason why we're here. Because like I said, I'm a very disciplined person. Like when it comes to my fitness, when it comes to my spirituality, when it comes to eating right, when it comes to not drinking too much, when it comes to drugs, like all these things. And the one vice that I grew up with to soothe myself because of the crazy childhood that I had was porn. And my introduction to porn was horrible, horrible. And I'll tell you why real quick. And I know we're kind of getting off on a tangent, but I want to get back to the vices. I had a relative, and I don't know if this person listens to the podcast, and I've never outed who this person is, and I won't, because I don't want to humiliate someone in my family. I don't talk to this person anymore. But this person, I spent the night at this person's house, and this person was an immediate family member. It wasn't an extended. And I spent the night at the house, and I was 9. I've never talked about this on a podcast. I've talked about this in other conversations. Sorry. I've talked about this at speaking events. I've never talked about this on my podcast. I was 9. I know the person, and I won't even reveal the gender, was really into weed at the time. And I think a lot of this person's life was spent high, and still is, maybe. I don't know. I was 9 and I was at this person's house, and this person thought it was hilarious. And I said, "Hey, can we watch a movie?" And this person said, yeah. Like, you want to watch, I'll never forget the movie, Toxic Avenger. For those of you guys who grew up in the 80s, just this totally kooky movie, right? But I thought it was hilarious. And I was like, yeah, it'd be great. So he pops in a VHS tape in the VCR, and I'm expecting to see the movie. And what do I see? I see this woman giving this guy a blowjob. And I didn't know what the heck I was even seeing. And I was like, what is this? And then they started having sex. And I remember closing my eyes. I'm 9. So at that point in my life, I thought it was gross. I'm like, oh my God, like, doesn't that hurt? Like, holy crap. Like that, like, I remember closing my eyes. Well, then I stopped closing my eyes. And I said the gender, doesn't matter. He thought it was hilarious. He's laughing his ass off. And I'm like, this is messed up. Can we turn this off? And he did. And as much as it grossed me out, it really, really intrigued me. I was like, what is this all about? I've never seen anything like this. Well, that spiraled me in, like, because the way I was raised in a really crazy childhood. I never got into drugs, never got into drinking when at a young age, ever. Never even touched it, didn't want to. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that my home life, there's a ton of alcohol, tons, lots of bad things happened. So I was just like, man, I don't even want anything to do with alcohol. But I certainly got into freaking Hustler magazines. I got into VHS tapes, right? That was how I self-soothed. Like that was my vice. And that turned into, like I battled with it for a while up until years and years ago. And I always thought it was innocent. It's like, oh, it's what dudes do, right? And it wasn't until I really got more in touch with my spirituality and really like the impact of what that was having in my marriage. I didn't see it. And the energy. And here's the other thing, man. This is the hamster wheel that really messes with me. And this is going to sound kind of sick and twisted, maybe to some degree. But was the straw that broke the camel's back. I had this thought. And I thought, if I die and go to heaven and I have to answer to all the time I spent doing this, what would God say? And the other thing too, is I think he'd forgive me, right? If I asked for forgiveness, but he'd be like, hey, you spent all this time. Look at all this time. If you would have taken this time and spent it doing this, you'd be a New York Times bestselling author. You would have this, this, and this. You would have the most amazing marriage that you never even thought was possible if you just put the time elsewhere into maybe learning about communication. You could have taken your son on a trip. You could have taken your son on the best camping trip possible, but instead you chose to use your time this way. I don't know what it was about that thought, and it was a thought I came up by myself, but I was like, this has got to stop. This has got to stop, because I only have so much time on this earth. And I certainly don't want to spend it, my precious time, where I could be spending it other ways doing that. And that was it.
Love it, brother. That speaks very much to my journey. Grew up, drugs and alcohol were not a big part of my life, but my thing was porn, man. My thing was porn and sex. And as you mentioned, porn for me was one of those things that I used to cope emotionally, to explore my sexuality, to deal with life. I was kind of a shy kid, so I was kind of like shy around girls, and it was a way for me to kind of experience that, in my own way. And very similar, man. It was something that as I grew and was on this personal and spiritual development track, I kind of had this moment of awareness in my adult life when I recognized, I'm like, man, like if I don't get a handle on this, like what does life look like in 20 years? So that was a real kind of moment of awareness and awakening for me, just kind of looking at the trajectory. And we know today, especially with the easy access of porn, it being at our fingertips, the genres just become more and more extreme. There's more and more and more of it out there. It's like, where does this go? Because porn is one of those things that's like a drug. It's like you need more and more and harder to kind of get that fix. So I definitely relate to you there, Larry. I would love to ask you. So once you had this moment of awareness, this awakening, porn abstinence or this porn recovery process, we recognize is like any recovery process. It's not always just a one and done thing. Oftentimes, it's a result of a lot of growth, of a lot of work, a lot of personal spiritual development and transformation. So what was your intentional or proactive journey, maybe out of the weeds around pornography addiction? Like, what did that look like for you? And what were some of those initial steps for you?
The initial steps was having an accountability partner. That was huge. Someone that I felt very, very safe with. Because men, here's the thing, right? Men will joke about it, right? Which we do. We joke about it to make it so not severe, so we don't have to feel the pain of it, right? So that's why we joke about it. And the coolest thing for me was getting an accountability partner. So, I think accountability can look like several different things, but for me, it was the definer in success and failure. So, like for instance, if I ever felt temptation, and I could always do this without shame, guilt, or blame, right? I would send an emoji, a text message of eyes to my accountability partner, and that was code for he and I. Hey, man, I need your help. I need you to help me to protect my eyes right now. And there would be a variety of different things. Very rarely was it a phone call. Sometimes the only accountability that I needed was sending that text. And I'm like, I know he knows now, right? Or he'll send me a text back, which was always the case right away. Be like, hey man, I got your back. What could you do right now that's productive and meaningful that isn't that? Can you write a note to your kids? Think about one thing that you want to acknowledge and appreciate about your kids and write that into a note and put it on his bed. And dude, like, listen, when we're in that like porn thing, right? That porn tunnel vision, as we like to call it, you can't see that. It's really hard. But when you think about that, like, holy cow, like I have the opportunity to make my son's day right now instead of doing this. And that was very helpful. Here's one other thing too. And this one I think will allow men to meet themselves a little bit. I want you to think of the next time that you're tempted with pornography, because this is something that still works for me today. Listen, man, I'm no saint. Like, I see something, I'll be on Instagram posting and I'll get triggered by an image I see, right? No different than any other dude. So, here's sometimes what I do. And I do this actually in several areas of my life. I will watch myself in the third person, almost like I am Scrooge, right? Watching his life unfold, either past, present, or future. And I will imagine that I'm not watching what I'm seeing. I will imagine watching what I'm doing. Like almost like as if I were to die and God took me on a journey of my life, things that I'm proud of, things that I'm not. And to watch myself about what I'm about ready to go do and what would be my thoughts. I'd probably be like, oh my God, dude, I can't even watch, right? That's what I would do. So whenever I'm tempted or I see something on Instagram, and I'm tempted to be like, oh man, I'm really stressed out. Like that would be a great relief. I think about that and boom, man, that brings me back down to earth, right? And that wasn't always easy, right? But it's become now a practice and it's been extremely helpful because if you really want to be ashamed of yourself, right? Watch yourself in the third person doing that. Mm-hmm. And it ain't a pretty picture, man.
Yeah, brother. Yeah. I love what you're sharing there, man. It's like at the end of the day, man, we teach all the tools and the tactics and the strategies and the skills and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, the only thing that stands between you and that choice to go to porn and to go to that web browser, it's a decision, man. It's a commitment. And that's why integrity and impeccability in our action is something that we emphasize so much, and a quality that we work to help our men hone within themselves, And another piece that you mentioned there, which I think is so important in our work, in our process, porn to purpose is a very intentional name. It really speaks to like my journey and the journey that we now take our men to, and we really help them get more clear on the why. And we have a 90-day program. So we take the first the first half of the program, we help them get really clear on the why around the pain that pornography is creating in their life, the suffering, what's been the impact and what's been the detriment in all the key areas of my life. Because as you mentioned, everything affects everything else, And then the second half of that is we help them really get clear on purpose, because at that split moment, whenever it's like, all right, I'm looking at this Instagram picture, and am I going to click on the next one, and what's going to come after that, and after that, it's really a matter of being clear on if I'm going to say no to porn, what am I going to say yes to? If I'm not going to direct my energy over here, where am I going to direct this energy? Am I going to direct this energy into my business, into my purpose, into my spiritual walk, into my family, into my children, into my relationships? So I think you're right on point, man. We must have clarity in vision and crystal clarity around our why, because we have to be clear on if we're going to say no, what are we going to say yes to instead?
Absolutely, man. And you mentioned something else there too that I think is really, really powerful. What we focus on expands. Like if I sit here and fixate on, I shouldn't look at porn today. What am I going to be fixated on? Looking at porn, because the brain doesn't work that way. The brain doesn't hear the words no and can't. It hears porn. It's almost like if I were to tell you or these listeners, whatever you do for the love of God, no matter what, do not think of an elephant right now. Do not think of a big, huge gray elephant that's standing behind you right now, right? It's impossible to not think of an elephant. So the more we fixate, and that's why I think it's amazing what my accountability partner did for me, is because he always altered my attention to something else. Like, he didn't talk me out of porn, right? What he did do was, you can do this instead of porn. Like, go do this thing instead. So instead of like, oh, porn, 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 now I'm thinking, I'm gonna write a note to my kid. Like, look, I have these personalized notes that I order from Vistaprint, where I put like an epic photo of one of my kids. I've got a gazillion of these things in different moments. And I keep these things in my office. I've got a few of them, more of them over there. And I'll put these like in my kids' lunches and their backpacks and stuff like that. And I'll put them on their bed. And I'll tell you, it's a great go-to, because, you know, it's not necessarily staying away from porn, right? That's the focus. It's, what amazing thing can you go do this instead of, right? It's okay to be tempted, right? It's okay to feel like you might have a weak moment. When it comes time to the silver lining, what are you going to choose to go do at the end of the day? What are you going to go do, right? We're all human. We are all sinners by nature. We are all faltered. But you have a decision when you draw a line in the sand. Are you going to do A or B? Which one's it going to be?
Yep. Yeah, brother. I'd love to touch on an element of this conversation, which I think is very, very, very relevant today, and I think relevant probably to the men in your community and the men in my community for sure. And it's like the conversation around how do we support our children around this conversation, you know, and what I would love to preface that with, because I'd love to touch on that, but what I'd also love to preface that with is a big key, a major emphasis that we really work to help our guys really get is, if you're going to lead your children in this, then you must be in integrity yourself.
Yep.
You know, you must lead by example. I had a gentleman reach out to me just recently, and I'll be very vague in this, but he reached out to me as his young boy had spoken with he and his partner, and shared that this young man was addicted to pornography, couldn't stop masturbation, and he was a teen and had this obsessive compulsive addictive relationship with porn, and it was so bad that he had gone to his parents about it, which I think is a big step for a kid to do. But the father came to me, and we were kind of exploring some options and some potential support, and we were brainstorming some things. And my question to him was, how are you in this area, you know? And it was a struggle for him as well.
Sure.
And I said, well, that's the first thing we have to do, brother. We have to get you in integrity around this first, because there's no way you can guide, lead, and support him if you're not in integrity with it yourself. So I would love to first ask you, Larry, what do you see as the value or the importance of men having this resolved to a degree in their own lives in order to be a leader to their families and their children around this?
That's a great question. I'll answer that a couple of different ways. So the best lessons in life are caught, not taught, right? I can talk to my son all day long about why he needs to eat healthy while I'm sitting there eating a bag of Doritos. And that message is not going to hit. Not that my kids would ever see me doing what we're talking about, right? But, you know, the same integrity holds true. Like, I can't sit there and tell my kids, hey, your fitness is super important to your overall physical, mental, and emotional health, while I'm sitting on the couch doing nothing, right? And I think that you have to, if I want my kids to not be on their screens as much while my phone is in my hand, I'm being a hypocrite. And by the way, I've done that, right? Why are you on your phone so much? Why are you on your iPad so much? Like, you know, you shouldn't really do that. Hang on. Like, come on, right? So, you know, a really good lesson for men out there is be the man. Be the man that you want your kids to be, right? If you don't want your kids on screens, create boundaries around your own screens. If you want your kids to be more healthy, go to the gym with them. Show them what healthy food is all about, right? If you don't want your kids watching porn, then don't do it yourself, whether they know about it or not. Like, listen, things creep in here, and people see through that, you know? So if you're not operating with integrity, like, so here's a good example. Physical fitness has been a big part of my life for 30 years. My kids see it every day, right? The way I work out, the way I eat, everything, and the way I talk about it, right? I'm very passionate about the way I talk about it. Now, if you don't truly believe in something that you're talking about, or you know you're being a hypocrite, that message is not going to resonate nearly as hardcore as you think it will, because it's going to come across weak. It's going to come across like you're a fool. They won't take you seriously, but they may or may not know why. But they're like, yeah, I got the message, but okay, right? But if you can be the example, like I've had to have conversations around this topic, porn, with my two oldest kids, right? And that's a continual conversation. It's a conversation that will never end, right? But if I'm going to have that conversation with them, and if I don't want my kids escaping to the bathroom, or to the shower or wherever they go, right, then I need to not be that person as well. And if I'm going to speak with authority and hey, I'm on your team with this, then I've got to act the part, right? I can't expect that they're going to take me seriously if I don't take myself seriously.
Amen, brother. Yeah, I mean, to me, I've recently come across this idea, which I've kind of always known about, but it was articulated well to me. But it's this idea that there's a distinction between lies of omission or lies of commission. Lies of omission are those things that we're doing that we don't necessarily speak out of, the things that we leave out, aka telling my kids not to watch porn while I've got my own, insidious porn habit going on. While we're on the conversation of pornography and leadership around children, what would be some very, okay, so we've got the example, being the example, right? We've got that, but what would be some additional practical steps or conversation points or things that you might share with some of the brothers that might be listening that may also be needing to navigate this conversation with their kids, Larry?
Sure. Great question. So a couple different things. So I'm going to go with some technology. I'm going to go in that direction, right? And what our kids have access to and what we can do about it. And I'm also going in the direction of what the conversation, I mentioned the term psychological safety. Like, listen, when you're talking to your kid about this topic, an environment of psychological safety without blame, shame, or pain needs to be there. I mean, the way I grew up, I was caught with porn and I was told I was going to hell. Like, blame, shame on you. How dare you? What's wrong with you? Like, all these things. And then you think you're completely abnormal, because at my age, like when I was younger like that, like no one I knew we didn't even talk about it as like 12-year-old kids. Right. So I thought, blame, shame, and pain is something that shouldn't be there. It needs to be a conversation. Right. Let me talk about the tech first, and let me talk about a way that we can resolve that. If you have a kid, boy or girl, boys in particular with porn, 30%, I think, of traffic online comes from girls, though, right? If I'm not mistaken, for porn.
That's correct. That's actually accurate. Yep.
So don't think because you have a daughter that she might not be Googling stuff like this, right? If you have a boy, it's really important. If you have a girl, you also have to be very cognizant of the sick, twisted online predators that are after your girl, right? So know that these devices are access to an absolute minefield called the internet. And we are completely and totally unequipped and inexperienced to raise kids with this type of power. And I know it sounds like I'm preaching from a pulpit. Oh, all kids have it. You know what?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to find out the ramifications of how powerful this device is when it's too late.
And it's brand new terrain.
It's brand new terrain. We weren't raised with this, but now we're raising a generation with no experience, right? But they know more about these things than we do. So here's what I'll tell you. Our organization, Dad Edge, has partnered with an amazing company called Bark. Bark is a company and an app that what it does is you download it to your kid's device and then you download it to your phone. And what it is, and then you get a dashboard. Bark will alert you because what it does is it detects keywords in internet searches, text messages, emails, social media, anything. Anxiety, depression, medical concerning content, suicidal ideation, adult searches, right? Sexual content, anything like that. It'll send you the alert and then it'll send you a screenshot of what it was, whether it's the text message, whether it's the website, whether it's whatever. It'll show you what it was. I can't imagine my life without Bark. Can't imagine it all. I think it's $130 a month. If guys use our coupon code, they get 10% off that. I would pay triple that because I've been using it for 2 years It has brought about one of the most amazing connections and communications and conversations that I've had with my kids, and I have their back. Like, listen, these things are like a bike. You don't allow your kids to go on their bikes without their helmet. If they have a phone or an iPad, get bark. It's the best way to protect them, because here's the other thing too. 92% of teenage suicides, the parents had no clue it was even coming. Not a clue. All the clues after the incident had happened were in the phone. Text messages. I want to kill myself. I'm so depressed. I did this. I did that. So anyway, that's a long way to say that I'm not going to go into too much detail because I want to protect the privacy of my kids. So I'm not going to name any of them, but I will tell you that those searches have been extremely rare. Shockingly, I'm actually very surprised, but my kids also know I bark on their phones. So those internet searches are very rare, but they have come up. And the way that they've come up, and now I'll talk about psychological safety and how to have that conversation, because a lot of guys are like, oh, wow, like, how do I navigate that? So I've always been taught through my podcast, if you want to make your kids feel safe, right? One of the things you can do is go on a walk with them side by side, be in a car with them side by side. Don't stand nose to nose, toes to toes. Hey, you want to tell me about that internet search you just went on? Because now they're going to feel intimidation. They're going to feel overpowered. They're going to feel shame. They're going to feel blame and pain. And you haven't even gotten to the pain part yet. They automatically feel completely ashamed of what they did. That's not the environment that you want to set. So go on a ride with them, go on a hike with them, go on a walk with them. The best conversations I've ever had with my kids are in the car or on a walk. And that's because we're side by side. Because psychologically, subconsciously, if you're walking next to me or driving next to me, both you and I are heading in the same direction. We are a team. We are not nose to nose, toes to toes conflict. So that is really important. The other thing too, some guys might not agree with this. It works great for me. I add humor to it. Right? Because humor lightens the load of the shame, right? It lightens the load of guilt. So I'll give you an example. Conversation I had with one of them, I'll never name who. I took him to Sonic for a soda. He loves Sonic soda. And I saw the search come up and I saw some of the things, and I got in the car. And my thing is anytime we're going to have a tough conversation, we're going to bring it up and start talking about it on the way to the destination. Then we're going to enjoy where we're at in the destination. We're going to talk about different things there. And then on the way home, we talk about solutions. And so I got him in the car and I looked at him and I was like, so, find anything good on the internet lately? And literally it was this. It was like, right? It was like deer in the headlights, looking to his left. And I'm like, it's okay, man. You're normal. Okay. Yes, I know. I've got bark on your phone. I was like, let's talk about it. I was like, dude, I was doing the same thing, man. I was like stealing my uncle's VHS tapes. Come on, man. I was smuggling those things. I was asking, I was like, dude, I had one friend of mine, no kidding around, that traded his bike for a hustler from another friend, traded his bike. And my kids, they start laughing, right? I'm like, dude, you are totally normal. Okay. So let's get that out of the way. You've got hormones raging, testosterone. Like, dude, you see women in yoga pants and all you want to do is go relieve yourself, right? We get that. I was like, but let's also talk about the guidelines. Let's talk about the boundaries. Let's talk about the things that people don't tell you about this. Here's where the rubber really meets the road, no pun intended. I told my son, obviously we had moral conversations around it, but I also told him, I was like, listen, here's one thing that none of your friends are talking about because they don't know it yet. I was like, men in their late teens and 20s are experiencing the highest levels of erectile dysfunction than any other generation. And do you know why? It's because they've spent so much time on their screens looking at porn and not the real thing. So when it came to the real thing, they're no longer stimulated. And I'm like, listen, man, let me tell you something from real experience here. Okay. There is nothing more humiliating. You want to crawl in a hole and die when you are with this girl who you think is beautiful and you want to impress her and you want to make her feel good and you want to pleasure her. And she's laying there like, let's go. And you're like, I can't, I don't know what's wrong with me, what's going on. And then you literally just want to drive her back home and never even look her in the eye again. Don't go through that pain, my man. If you stay away from this, most likely you're not going to have that issue. You get into this, you're going to have that issue. And let me tell you something, man, that's a pain you don't want. And literally sounds kind of crazy, right? All the moral conversations we had and all that was important, but that one hit. He's like, dude, I don't want that. I was like, okay. And I was like, and also listen, this is the final thing I'll say. You're going to grow up. You're going to get married. You might have a son, you might have a daughter, but I want you to think about this. If you have a daughter and maybe she goes in a bad direction or something, right? Who knows? Would you want a young man like you Googling your daughter, looking at her the way you're looking at that woman, pleasing yourself, and that's your daughter? And man, that one, boom, like that one hit him big time. He's like, no. And I'm like, okay. So that was the conversation. And what I can tell you, has that completely eradicated adult searches on his phone? No, but I can count on one hand how many times it's happened in the 3 years he's had his phone. And we continue to have the conversation.
Yeah, man. So important, man. I love that leadership, man. And I love your willingness to be vulnerable, to step in there, to have those conversations that might be uncomfortable, maybe awkward. We're kind of getting close to time here, but I just want to just touch on this because I think it's really important, Larry. For me, I didn't really feel very comfortable growing up having the conversation around sex at all. I know like my parents caught me with porn like a little bit here and there and stuff as a kid. And for me, the conversation around sex was always uncomfortable in my home. It's not like it was directly demonized, but I just didn't feel comfortable having the conversation around sex, really exploring my own sexuality as a kid. And I think that led to my dependence on pornography, as I grew into a young man. How important is it that parents are normalizing the conversation around sex and making that an okay conversation within the household, especially maybe some parents who are coming from maybe more strict, more rigid, maybe religious households?
Whew. Oh, that's a big question, right? Because, our family were very, very spiritual. So I'm going to tiptoe on some thin ice here, I think, probably. I think the way, listen, you can really push the message of why this is morally wrong in a faith-based way, right? And that's important. I am not excluding that from the conversation. It was a part of my conversation with my son. But I also know that if I only had that conversation and I only hit that point, it wasn't going to hit as hard as some of the other things, right? Some things are more important to other people and kids than others. And you have to know your kid's hot button, right? My son, they're of, my two older ones, they're at this age where they're now starting to talk to girls. They're starting to quote unquote kind of date girls. We have girlfriends over here, for them to hang out and stuff like that. So while spirituality is a very big thing in our house, we're churchgoers, we're prayers, we talk openly about Christ and our faith, and it's important to them. And I love how important it is to them. But I also know that that particular point at their age is not enough. I have to hit some of the other things for them to really get it, right? I have to introduce like some consequences that I know that they don't want to feel, right? So if I tell them like, hey, this is morally wrong, it's against the 10 Commandments, right? This is it's basically online prostitution is really what it is, right? It's a paid actor that you're watching, right? Actress, all that. And that doesn't make sense to them because they're like, well, I'm a long way from dying. Like I have plenty of time to, ask for forgiveness. But if I say, hey, this could happen in the next year or two, this could be the ramifications. Will they feel that pain, right? So I think it, depending on your situation, depending on your family, I highly encourage men to have the moral conversation around faith and spirituality around this, but also know, depending on the dynamics of your home, that may not be enough. And they may need more in your face, like real things that could happen, especially if you have a boy, that physically will happen to them if they continue upon that path, right? Because it's our job to point those things out. So that's what I'll say about it. You're muted.
Beautiful, brother. Thanks so much. So relevant to the world today, so relevant to the conversation, so relevant to our community, and so relevant to your community as well, I'm sure, brother. Larry, as we kind of come to a close here today, what message is on your heart right now, brother? Like, what's your word to the men or women, whoever might be listening out there, man? What would you say?
I would say this. If this is something, and I'll speak to porn, right? If this is something that you're diving into, um, know that this is, in my experience anyway, this is the most common drug and vice of anything. It's more powerful than alcohol. It's more powerful than drugs. It's more powerful than anything that I've ever seen. And especially now, since all you need is a phone to access whatever you want, it's there. So if you're dealing with it, know that you're the majority, not the minority. The other thing too is the message I have for you is audit your time. And if you're on a journey, or if you have any, any temptation to, or I'm sorry, motivation to eradicate porn from your life, what I can tell you, the mindset of like, I have to stay away from porn, I have to stay away from porn. Instead, what can you go do instead of, not staying away from? Because if you're focused on staying away from, the temptation is only going to expand. And then the other thing too is get in community, whether that's Matt, your amazing community, right? Get in community, get an accountability partner. If you raise your hand and be the first one to speak and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, guess what? You're going to free 10 out of 10 men in the room with you, because they're going to be like, yep, that's me too. Thank God somebody else said it. Now let's do something about it. So get in community, get accountability, right? Because that's what's really important.
Amen, brother. Love that. Um, Larry, thanks so much for bringing your wisdom here with us today, man. Really appreciate your essence and what you bring, brother. For the men that would like to connect with you, connect with the Dad Edge community, check out more of what you're doing, what do you have going on, and what's the best way for men to connect with you, brother?
Yeah, so you can find everything that we're doing at the Dad Edge, thedadedge.com. Everything online is Dad Edge. So on Instagram, at the Dad Edge, you can find me on Facebook, Larry Hagner, very accessible. If a community is what you're looking for, you can go to thedadedge.com/alliance for that. And on the website too, we have all kinds of marriage resources and quite a few free resources. I just launched a free resource, a video called 25 Intimate Conversation Starters. If you want to go check that out, you can go to thedadedge.com/marriage course. There's a course there, but there's also an opportunity where you can learn how to ask your wife better questions to elevate the intimacy and the connection with her. Because I guarantee if you have better connection with your wife, you're going to be less likely to dive into porn. If you're having better sex with your wife, the chances of you needing porn are going to be less, right? So focus on those things, but that's the easiest way to find me.
For sure, brother. Thanks so much for your share here, brother. Thanks so much for your time, for your investment, for your energy, for your leadership here today. We really appreciate you, man. Larry Hagner, the Dad Edge. Thanks so much, brother, and we'll look forward to connecting with you again.
Awesome.